speak with you a little bit and interact with you a bit, particularly on this Black Solidarity Day, and to talk about consciousness, culture, and power. In some sense, sort of continuing our prior discussion in terms of consciousness, which off the bat to many people may seem somewhat abstract, but it is not an abstract situation. Consciousness is not an abstraction. It is a very concrete presence in the human mind and in our lives as people. One of the things that this culture tries to do very much to African people is to make us resist abstractions or things that sound abstract. Yet, it is in terms of the abstract that people act, that people actually control their behavior, and the means by which people organize their behavior. Take the word nation. I mean, really, what is it in reality? You cannot just find it in any concrete place or circumstance, and yet you can organize whole armies and people around the concept of nation. Nation as a symbol. You can generate all types of emotional feelings. You can move people to sacrifice their lives, to give their all in terms of what is essentially an abstraction, nation. And from the abstraction nation, we get the further abstraction nationalism. And yet nationalism has been the symbolic foundation by which means people have organized themselves and overthrown their oppressors, by which means colonialism has been rolled back and people have come to achieve an identity that has permitted them to operate as one and to mutually benefit one and the other. Those who rule us, you see, would like for us not to be comfortable with things that are not immediately concrete, with things that we cannot see in a tangible form or feel with our hands or feel in a material way. They seek to make then the black consciousness a concrete consciousness, to make it just a hands-on consciousness, you see, because that is the consciousness of servants. The consciousness of masters is the consciousness that wrestles with symbols and ideas, that wrestles with mathematics and logic, and uses those symbols to control the world and to change the world and to transform the world, organize it and direct it. Therefore, the masters of this world would like to make us think that abstract thinking is their preserve and not the preserve of those who serve. And many of us as African people have fallen for that kind of distinction. Many of us have tried to define our blackness in terms of our concreteness only, and not in terms of our ability to manipulate symbols and use symbols and manipulate abstractions as means of moving our behavior. The European has sought to make us a concrete people and a people who are only connected to the immediate by disconnecting us from our history and by taking over the responsibility for our past, and therefore making us not responsible for our past or responsible for our future. You see, in order to move into the past, one has to abstract himself or herself from the present, to move from the immediate, and yet to be moved by that which is not immediate, that which is not tangible, but yet in many ways is very important. When you deny then a people a past and a long past, in a sense, in effect, you begin to impair their abstract capacities and their abstract abilities, and you begin to impair their abilities to understand the present and redirect their behavior in the present in terms of the past, in terms of something that is not there in the immediate present. When you rob a people of responsibility for their future, again, rob them of having to move from the present into the future, to use their imagination, to use concepts that are placed into the distant future, and yet look at that future, deal with that future as a means of changing behavior in the present so that that future can be realized or avoided. So consequently, when African people, particularly African American people, were cut off from our past, and when we were made not responsible for our future, when the future was placed in the hands of another people, our ability to act in terms of abstraction, in terms of the not so immediate, but in terms of the future and based on the past, were impaired, and consequently many of us are caught up in the immediate present, in the immediately concrete. We have a short attention span and a short mental span. This is the kind of span for people who have been prepared to be servants, whose role in life is to carry out orders and orders only.
The tradition I mentioned is referred to as Tantan in the Cameroon, but I think another West African word for it is Isusu, coming out of Nigeria. I believe that the word Susu still remains in the Caribbean African tradition. One of the beautiful things about this is that it can be practiced in families and small groups between any number of groups. Thus, we can plan in this fashion for raising money and funding our economic development. I think this piece I just read about the Korean can also be instructive. There's a book by Ivan Light called Ethnic Enterprises in America, which talks about ethnicity in America in terms of economics. In the main lecture, I skipped over a section that dealt with history and sociotherapy. We have to use history as a means of reconstructing our personality and reconstructing ourselves. If we found these kinds of economic organizations, it also becomes necessary to reconstruct social relations to foster trust, relatability, and other positive social characteristics. To go into them purely as economic operations, given the tremendous brainwashing as many of us African Americans have received, and the tremendous amount of alienation that has been projected onto our personality, sometimes means that we may set ourselves up for disappointment. So we should plan on a number of levels. One level, of course, is the economic one. The other, which I think is the most fundamentally important one, is developing a strong sense of social belongingness in the group. Getting people to meet their monthly obligation, or however you choose to put money in the pot, pretty much relies on the group's ability to apply social pressure and upon the person's fear of social ostracism and the loss of esteem in that group. If the person does not fear a loss of esteem or does not fear social pressure, then you will have people dropping out when they got their million, leaving you in the lurch. So a part of the deal is we must figure out ways that we can build a very strong social unit. As a matter of fact, and part of this Cameroonian article, when members got into a situation where they could not meet the obligations of the group, their social ties were so strong that some of them actually deleted themselves rather than not meet the obligations of their group. I'm not suggesting that people go that deeply. However, I do want to stress the importance of first rebuilding and overcoming the alienation that has been projected unto us as a people. You do not need a wholesale structured organization with this kind of plan. It could begin in the home, the community, within your social group, From there, it can again begin to become tradition. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I'm Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Dr. Amos Wilson's The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy. And I'm picking up on looks like a conversation that Dr. Amos Wilson is having. And the person is giving, what I just read to you was Dr. Amos Wilson's first response to the line of questions. So he's talking about, in order to effectively build an economic unit, economic culture, economic structure, we have to restructure the way we think and see ourselves as individuals and restructure the way we think and see ourselves as a group. We don't trust each other when it comes to money on a large enough scale. We do have examples, which I am very proud of. We do have examples of groups of Black people coming together, raising money, and creating things for themselves. I believe it was a group of people somewhere in Georgia who put their money together and brought some land and built a community on this land. That's what we're talking about. But in order for that to stick, the mentality has to change. We have to grow up. We have to replace the programming, as I say every week. We have learned to not trust each other. We have learned to only trust the white man, only trust the oppressor, only trust people who don't look like you, which is a big problem, especially when we're talking about in terms of building for ourselves. People who don't trust themselves cannot build with themselves. We will go around in circles. We'll start something, get to a point to where somebody's not happy, somebody drop out, somebody else drop out. Next thing you know, it's like one person standing. The trust isn't there. It hasn't been rebuilt, but we haven't taken the time to rebuild ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, on all those different levels. We haven't taken the time to rebuild ourselves. And that's what Dr. Wilson is encouraging us to do, to make sure that we spend time building ourselves up as individuals, but also building ourselves up as a community, as a neighborhood, as a city, whatever. I'm not asking to start off on some kind of large scale movement, but the people around you, the Black people around you, get together. We need to get together and make something happen in any kind of way. Use your skill sets in any kind of way, but get together and make things happen for ourselves. We have to build for ourselves. We have to educate ourselves. We have to empower ourselves. It's all on us. Self-esteem, self-evaluation, self-image, whatever you want to put behind it. It all starts with us. And this is what Dr. Wilson is encouraging us to do. He's reminding us that our mindset is the way it is because of the conditioning that we received during slavery and during Jim Crow. Our history and our identity was purposely taken away from us. So this Negro mindset can be implanted in us, and that is how we operate. We operate as a destructive, regressive group of people, but that can change. That can change. We have plenty of examples of Black people cleaning ourselves up. What my brother Carl Tone Jones put me on the term, Wukusu, wake up, clean up, stand up. We can do it and get that from Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X was able to wake up, clean up, stand up. I mean, look at the life that he was living before he came into the information that the Nation of Islam gave. And look at the pristine person that he was when he passed, right? That's just one example. There's plenty of examples of Black people cleaning themselves up. But we have to clean ourselves up in the right way, not in a way to empower the system of white supremacy, but in a way to build something concrete for Black people that can be powerful. So I'm jumping back in on page 55, the second question. The question is, I think of the church as a very valuable institution. How do you see the church and what should it become? So Dr. Wilson's answer is, of course, the major role of the church is one of propagating and encouraging spirituality, ethics, and rightful behavior among people. Some people would say salvation also. But the church is a social institution like any other institution. It does not have to stick with that definition and the perception of itself. When you look at ads on TV and hear them on the radio, you'll note that they are designed to bypass a person's critical and analytical scrutiny. They're designed to speak directly to the emotions so that the person acts in terms of feelings instead of reason. Sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? We're promoting feelings instead of reason, right? Therefore, emotions are the bread and butter of advertising, and ultimately, in this society, the bread and butter of the economic social systems. So often, we as Africans in America are encouraged to be emotional and spiritual. Often, we confuse the two things to the exclusion of critical thinking. We are kept in this emotional spiritual state, and it is a bogus kind of state. It opens us to manipulation by external forces, such that we cannot bring to bear on our everyday problems common sense and reasoning. So while the church may see its primary role as maintaining spirituality, fostering an emotional spiritual relationship with God, it must also recognize that we are people living on earth and that we are a people who must feed and protect our children and our economic interests. Therefore, the church can and should play an economic role in African American life. Right. Spot on. He's spot on. That comes from studying the behavior of people, studying the behavior of ourselves, but also studying the behavior of our oppressors, right? These social sciences were created to be able to study all these things, and Black people were the lab rats, right? But they understand how we react emotionally. We don't act emotionally, we react emotionally, right? And so that's why they know, that's how they know how to keep us at a subservient state. You spark that emotional interest, you spark that emotional response, and you're gonna have them. It's gonna be continuous, a continuous reinvigorating or re-stimulating of that emotional response, so that we continue to do the same things over and over and over. It's about how we feel rather than what's right for us or what's best for us. And as long as we're operating off of how we feel, we'll never get to what's best for us. Logic must trump feeling.